Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into the 6 types of punishments outlined in the Sanhita. It's a bit of a heavy topic, I know, but stick with me, we're going full on law and order here, except instead of procedurals, we're dealing with an ancient legal text. And trust me, it's a doozy. We're talking punishments that range from, well, that seems a bit much too, okay, that tracks with a whole lot of fascinating history in between. Let's break them down one by one because, you know, what else are you doing with your day? Actually, don't answer that. Let's just assume you're here because you find archaic legal systems strangely compelling, which, let's be honest, you absolutely do. All right, let's get the grim stuff out of the way first, shall we? Death, the big one. The punishment that, historically speaking, societies have really liked to hand out. The Sanhita is no different. In this system, death is reserved for the most serious offences, the crime so egregious that, well, let's just say they make parking in 2 spaces look like a parking ticket haiku in comparison. Now, I know what you're thinking. John, you're being deliberately vague about what these crimes actually are. And you'd be right, because the specifics can vary depending on how you interpret the Sanhita and which historical context you're looking at. But we're talking about things that fundamentally disrupt the social order, acts of extreme violence, that kind of thing. The point is, the death penalty in the Sanhita is a big deal. It's not something that's handed out lightly. It's the ultimate punishment reserved for the most serious breaches of the social contract. Next up, we have life imprisonment. Imagine, if you will, a world without parole hearings, without the possibility of release. That's the reality for those sentenced to life under the Sanhita. It's a sentence designed to remove the offender from society permanently, to ensure they can never again harm the community. Now, I know what you're thinking. John, aren't you sugarcoating it a bit? Life in prison back then must have been brutal. And you'd be right again. We're not talking about cable TV and conjugal visits here. Historical prisons were, well, let's just say they wouldn't exactly be featured in a luxury travel brochure. The conditions were often deplorable. Sanitation was practically non-existent, and the overall experience was designed to be as unpleasant as possible. It was punishment in its rawest form. Okay, so we've covered death, we've covered life behind bars. Now let's talk about rigorous imprisonment. This, my friends, is where things get really fun. Just kidding. It's awful. Rigorous imprisonment takes the whole prison is no picnic thing to a whole new level. We're talking hard labor, back-breaking work, the kind that makes you wish you'd put more effort into winning those schoolyard fights so you could have been the one giving the wedgies, not receiving them. Think of it as the Sanhita's way of saying, you want to break the rules, fine, but you're going to do it while building roads, quarrying stones, or whatever other grueling task we can find. It's punishment with a side of productivity, albeit a very reluctant and probably sweaty side of productivity. And before you ask, no, there were no ergonomically designed pickaxes back then, just pain, suffering, and the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, you'd eventually earn enough for a slightly less uncomfortable loincloth. Now, for those of you who thought rigorous imprisonment sounded a bit rough, well, the Sanhita has a slightly less intense option, simple imprisonment. This is your classic lock them up and throw away the key scenario, but without the added bonus of forced manual labor. Don't get too excited though. We're still talking about historical prisons here, which, as we've established, were about as much fun as a root canal performed by a badger with anger management issues. But hey, at least you wouldn't be breaking your back on top of it. Think of it this way. If rigorous imprisonment is like failing gym class while also having to do everyone's homework, simple imprisonment is like just failing gym class. It's still not great, but it could be worse. All right, let's move away from the whole incarceration thing for a bit and talk about a punishment that hits a little closer to home: forfeiture of property. This is the Sanhita's way of saying, you've got stuff, well, guess what? Crime doesn't pay, and now neither do you. Basically, if you were found guilty of certain offences, the authorities had the right to seize your belongings. Land, livestock, that very stylish toga you saved up for, gone. It was a way to punish offenders financially, stripping them of their wealth and status. Now, I know what you're thinking, John. This seems a bit like stealing. And you know what? You're not entirely wrong. But hey, at least they weren't confiscating your firstborn child as well, probably. Ah, the good old-fashioned fine, the bread and butter of modern-day traffic violations and minor offences. Well, guess what? It's been around for centuries. Even the Sanhita recognized that sometimes a good old-fashioned financial slap on the wrist is all you need. Depending on the severity of the offence, you might have to cough up some silver, some livestock, or maybe even a portion of your crops. Think of it as a very early form of income tax, except instead of going towards public services, it went towards, well, not being thrown in prison. It wasn't a perfect system, of course. Rich folks could usually afford to get away with more. Kind of like how a parking ticket is just a minor annoyance for a billionaire, but hey, at least it was something. And last but not least, we have community service. That's right, even back in the days of the Sanhita, they understood the value of making people give back to the community they'd wronged. Now, this wasn't your modern-day pick-up trash on the highway type of community service. It was a bit more rustic. Think cleaning out the communal well, helping to repair the city walls, or maybe even entertaining the village elders with your best lute playing. It may not have been glamorous, but it was a way to make amends, to atone for your misdeeds by contributing to the greater good. Plus, it probably beat the heck out of being stuck in a cramped, smelly prison cell. And there you have it, the 6 types of punishments under the Sanhita. Each serves a different purpose in the justice system, reflecting the values and beliefs of the time. From the severity of the death penalty to the practicality of fines, these punishments offer a fascinating glimpse into how our ancestors maintained order and addressed wrongdoing. Of course, we can't ignore the fact that many of these punishments were harsh, even brutal, by today's standards. But understanding them helps us appreciate how far we've come in our understanding of justice and human rights. It reminds us to keep striving for a fairer, more humane system where punishment is about rehabilitation and restoration, not just retribution. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more informative content.